Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a seriously radical 2024 essay by an author named Xu Feng. It's a piece that boldly argues that the root of all global crises, I'm talking everything from war all the way down to corporate fraud, doesn't actually lie in our systems of government or our economies. Instead, it lies entirely within human consciousness. It's a fascinating perspective that pretty much flips traditional political and social theory right on its head.
Here is our roadmap for today. We're going to cover the soul-guarding concept, the futility of nations, questioning religion and law, the open borders argument, the true cost of neglect, and finally, cultivating a new society. Let's get right into it. Starting off with Section 1, the soul-guarding concept, which the text positions as the true root of civilization. So I want you to picture your own consciousness as a literal garden. In Xu Feng's framework, your thoughts and your core values, those are the seeds you plant. Whatever seeds you plant are going to dictate your actions, and collectively, our actions dictate the entire state of our society. The essay argues that actively building and tending to this internal garden is the absolute cornerstone of a civilized world, way more important than any of the tangible external stuff we usually obsess over, like governance, weapons, laws, or wealth distribution. Think about what happens when this internal garden is just neglected. If it gets overrun with things like the worship of money, power, envy, or greed, the author says vices are naturally going to flourish. That's how we end up with systemic corruption, tyrannical officials, counterfeit goods, and basically just total societal chaos. But on the flip side, when the garden is actually cultivated and hearts are purified, society naturally finds peace, social order harmonizes, and we're actually able to achieve beautiful, fulfilling lives. Moving on to Section 2, the futility of nations, which the essay views as a massive system of artificial barriers. This brings us to a really sweeping question posed by the author. Are nations actually useful to humanity? Well, the essay argues that our very design of nations is deeply fundamentally flawed. Think about it. They've been around for thousands of years, yet according to the text, they primarily just bring war, plunder, and artificial borders. When every single nation prioritizes its own interests, for example, through America First-style policies, it inevitably leads to ruthless competition and unending conflict. In this kind of system, the strong just dominate through sheer force, and the weak are subjected to systemic injustice, forced to live under the constant shadow of things like nuclear blackmail. That takes us right into Section 3, questioning religion and law. We're putting our oldest institutions under the microscope. Just like with the concept of nations, we have to look at our millennia-old religious and legal systems and honestly ask, have they brought us true peace and freedom, or are they really just restrictive? The critique here is honestly pretty sharp. Religious dogma? The author claims it just numbs the soul and completely closes our minds to true joy. And the law? Well, we have millions of legal statutes worldwide, yet they completely fail to prevent wars or guarantee any kind of prosperity. Instead of actually stopping crime, the essay argues they often just restrict our freedom of movement and our right to dissent. So the author posits a total redefinition. True law should simply be any pathway that enables people to live happily and freely. Therefore, anything hindering that joy, like rigid dogma or restrictive statutes, literally cannot be called true law. Part 4 explores a highly specific example of this, the open borders argument. It's a very radical perspective on immigration. The core logic presented here is absolutely fascinating. If you frame the entire planet as just a single, tiny village floating in the vast cosmos, migration should be an inherent universal right. The text famously drops this line, "If illegal immigration is deemed a crime, then all humans are guilty because the Earth started entirely empty." Let's trace the author's logic through time here. We start way back in the primordial era with an Earth that had 0 human inhabitants. Then, throughout ancient history, all humans migrated from somewhere else to settle the planet. Jump to centuries ago, and indigenous peoples established vast societies across lands like North America. And then, if we look at recent centuries, the United States was essentially built as a stronghold by people who, under today's definitions, would absolutely be considered illegal immigrants. The text is pointing out a perceived hypocrisy. Why is past migration celebrated as the very foundation of a nation's strength, while modern migration is so heavily criminalized? And that leads to a really bold question from the author. Why not just allow unrestricted migration? The text challenges the historical success of any society that strictly locks out outsiders, arguing instead for a radically open, borderless world where the entire planet just transforms into one united society.
Now for Section 5, the true cost of neglect. We are zooming right in on daily life. I want to ground this for a second. If you're an entrepreneur listening to this right now, where does your time and energy actually go every day? Let's bring this vast global philosophy right down to your everyday personal frustrations. According to the essay, the tangible costs of an uncultivated consciousness are just enormous. Look at business. If you're constantly guarding against fraud and managing complex relationships, you're losing sleep, dealing with overwhelming anxiety, and hemorrhaging money to skyrocketing operational costs. In society at large, the author points out that it leads to toxic food, theft, and living in constant fear for your safety in bureaucratic battlegrounds. Even in our interpersonal lives, a neglected soul garden breeds deceit and selfishness. It reduces romantic and familial relationships to mere tools for personal gain. The author is insisting that our greatest troubles, across the board, stem directly from interacting with people whose internal gardens are totally neglected. Finally, we arrive at Section 6, Cultivating a New Society. This is the author's ultimate call for reflection. So, how do we actually navigate out of this? The author prescribes a very specific path forward. It requires us to critically examine our history, scrutinize our current reality, and be entirely willing to openly question established authority. But most importantly, it calls for a collective purification of humanity's soul. Shufang argues that without this deep, internal reflection and the active cultivation of our collective consciousness, our path forward as a civilization is only going to grow narrower, steeper, and much more dangerous. I want to leave you with this really provocative thought directly inspired by the text. If every single nation, law, and corporate structure is merely a reflection of our internal state, we have to ask ourselves, are we fighting the wrong battles? Are our borders and governments the actual problems, or are they just the ultimate symptoms of an uncultivated human mind? It's a powerful question that challenges us to look inward before we ever try to look outward. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I hope this gives you a completely new lens through which to view the world around you.